All right, today we're going to talk about biomes. Biomes is our next unit. And biomes are very similar to ecosystems, but instead of talking about one specific area on the planet, we're going to talk about areas that are very similar, that are in different locations across the planet. What is a biome? Biome is an area that's going to be very similar. Um, you're going to have very similar life forms. You're going to have very similar soil type, and the land's going to be the same. So you're going to have like mountains or rivers or streams um, to be very similar. The temperature and amount of precipitation also help determine a biome. Uh, so when we look into biomes, when we look at what biomes are, we have to look for these key elements to say that these biomes are the same biome, whether that's a desert biome or a tundra or even a tropical rainforest or moist forest is what we'll be uh, calling them. So just kind of pay attention to these things. These are important. They will be on your test. The different types of biomes are determined by the types of life form and the similarity in the actual land and animals that are living in that area. So let's start with deserts. As you can see, there's some funny looking things in the desert. And when we look throughout the world, throughout the earth, you see a lot of different animals that look different, but they have very similar adaptations depending on their biome. So in the desert, we got a lot of low precipitation. We got wide changes in temperature. It's going to be hot during the day and cold at night. It's going to be mostly made of gravel and rock. So this is not like the desert in Aladdin that we see where there's tons of sand, where there's tons of just mounds of sand. A lot of time they're going to be mostly made of gravel and rock, and we're going to see a lot of animals that blend in with those gravels and rock, and also a ton of animals that store up water to be able to survive because we don't have very much precipitation. And a lot of times these animals have adapted to where they can handle extreme heats and extreme cold depending on the time of day. So when we see these animals, they're going to have funny adaptations like this ant over here, or if we know at camels, their hump actually stores water for them. But those are the kind of adaptations we're going to see. Cacti, they don't need a lot of water. They store it up. And actually in the desert, a lot of people will cut cactus open to be able to get water if they can't get to water anytime soon. The grasslands. Now, this is where we live. The grasslands are going to be areas like Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. I say Missouri last because, well, it's Missouri. I'm just kidding, guys. Calm down. I know that's where you live, and I know most of you at least enjoy it. Some of you are probably ready to get out of here, but Missouri is a nice place. This is a place where you're going to have a lot of grass. We're not going to have a ton of trees. There's going to be a lot of open space. We're going to have very distinct seasonal cycles. We're going to know when it's spring. We're going to know when it's summer. We're going to know when it's fall. And we're going to know when it's winter. We're going to see changes in the plants. We're going to see migration through this area by the animals as well. We're going to have a lot of farms in this area. There's a lot of farms in Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. There's a lot of different types of farming areas because of the nutrient-rich soil that allows the farms and the soil to be able to grow crop. And as we see down here in this bottom picture, that's exactly what's going on. We're growing crop. It's a perfect place for it, and we're going to just continue to do that. These humans, us, we converted this land to farming, and we drove out a ton of animals. We started killing buffalo for just their skin or their fur to keep ourselves warm. We drove them out of an area because we started turning all their land into farming. And with that being said, uh, The wolves didn't have much to eat, so they left as well. But we still see a lot of deer in these areas because deer will still eat and scavenge off of our crops, and they won't care much for changing that. So that is why we see a lot of deer still. The tundra is interesting to me. It's like a frozen desert, but it's usually in a high mountainous area. Why do I say it's like a frozen desert? Well, we don't have very much precipitation, and it's very cold there. It's always cold, but when the winter rolls around, it's extremely cold. We're talking about negative temperatures. We're not talking about Kansas or Missouri weather. We're talking about negative temperatures. Most of the time, the ground's going to be frozen. It's called permafrost. It's always frozen. Parts of the tundra will unfreeze, but a lot of times, the farther north you go, the farther you go in the mountains, it's usually frozen. And again, you're not going to have a ton of life forms because there's just not a lot to support life there. You're not going to see a lot of plants. You're not going to see a lot of plants, so that means there's not going to be a lot of animals that eat just plants. So those animals that eat just plants will not be able to supply for those animals that eat just animals because there's just not enough food to go around. Most animals you're going to see are going to be moving or migrating. That's like the Canadian geese you see flying around here. They move south for the winter because it's just too cold. It's just too much. So they move to be able to not only avoid the cold, but once the cold comes, the plants go away, and they don't have very much to eat. So they move to a place where they're able to have more food and eat more. And typically what happens is when your food migrates, you migrate as well. So when, let's say, the caribou migrate, the wolves are not very far behind because that's their food. So they got to stay with their food so they can eat it. So you're going to see a lot of animal migration. If one animal is migrating, there's typically going to be more than one animal migrating to keep up, to make sure that they have a food source as well. So the tundra is like a frozen desert because you're not going to have a ton of precipitation in this area. You're going to have very little precipitation, and it's just not going to be very well for sustaining life forms. Do things live there? Absolutely. But a lot of times they either hibernate or migrate, like this polar bear. He'll fall asleep, or she'll fall asleep for the winter and then wake up and try and find food once spring hits. A conifer forest. Now, a lot of us see pine trees around here. We see a lot of pine cones. But this is an area that's going to have low precipitation. The reason we know it has low precipitation is because of plant life, and also, we can measure that at this point. Less moisture means there's going to be thinner leaves. They're going to be needle-like. They're going to be pointy, like we see on a Christmas tree. If the fire doesn't come, like we see in this bottom corner, it doesn't leave the nutrients, and also the dead trees and the dead needles and the dead animals even would just fill up the bottom of the forest, and the soil would be taken over, and there would not be enough nutrients. So this fire actually leaves nutrients behind in the soil. So fire is good as long as it doesn't get obviously out of control. Like we have wildfires in California that are not good because they get out of control and they damage people's homes and things like that. But we also do want fires to happen because the more fires that occur when necessary, not all the time, but when necessary, leave nutrients in the soil so that more plants, younger plants, can grow up and keep the, I guess you would call, cycle of plant life and new life continuing in these forests. A deciduous forest, those are the trees with the big, broad leaves. If you look out our window, you're going to see some trees that are very descriptive of what we say here. A lot of deciduous forests, they're going to have a lot of precipitation. They're going to have a lot of trees and plants. The trees are going to produce leaves during the growing season, and then when it comes to fall, we're really used to this here in Kansas City, the leaves will shed and fall off. The trees and animals, a lot of times we lose this ground because there's just not enough timber People don't plant trees to cut them down. They just cut down trees that are already there. So we lose these areas due to harvesting the timber and allowing people to take this wood and use it for their own purposes. Now, as we talk and as we learn more about the deciduous forest, we're going to see things uh, like this is where we talk about like Yellowstone Park, things like that. That's the kind of forest this is. There's a lot of precipitation. Uh, the climate just doesn't allow for year-round growth and trees to continue to have leaves, but a lot of times the animals don't migrate in these places because there's still food and there's still nutrients for animals to be left in this area. Scrubs, and I'm not talking about your boyfriends, okay? I'm talking about scrubs, like the 3 types of scrubs: the thorn scrub, the Mediterranean scrub, and the chaparral scrub. The thorn scrub is dry all year round. This is where you're going to find like your safari when you're talking about Africa. When we look at like the Lion King, let's just point out the Lion King. That is a scrub, and I don't want no scrubs, except the Lion King's the best Disney movie in the history of ever. I'll say it. You heard it here first, folks. So when you think about a scrub, think about the Lion King. We got a little bit of tall grass, but it's typically dried out. There's some trees, but they're not going to be big, massive trees. But you're going to see them spread out like we see in that top picture up there. That's going to be a scrub that we would typically see in Africa. That's a thorn scrub. That's where you're going to find most of your African animals. The Mediterranean scrub, they're warm and they're dry, flowers and small trees. The fire is extremely important in all 3 of these scrubs, but especially the Mediterranean scrub. The Mediterranean scrub is the fire, puts the nutrients back in the soil and allows more things to grow in that place. The chaparral scrub is dry, but more moisture than the Mediterranean. And this is where we're going to get our unique species. This is basically in Australia. This is where we're going to see this kind of scrub. The chaparral scrub is in Australia. So that's the bottom one there. The middle one is obviously the Mediterranean. The pictures I'm talking about, the middle picture is obviously the Mediterranean. And again, like I said, the thorn is the top one. Ladies and gentlemen, there is so much. Ladies and gentlemen, there is so much more that I could tell you about these things, but like I said, I'm not going to try and trick you. So the most important thing to do is write down what you see on your screen, get it in your notes, and start learning it. Remember, our scrubs aren't going to have a ton of moisture, but you got to realize that in reverse order, you have chaparral, Mediterranean, and thorn. And those in that order, they have the most water. So chaparral's got the most, then it's Mediterranean, then it's thorn. Okay. So there's a lot of things that we need to know about this, and that's one of them. But most importantly, write down what you're getting on the screen in front of your eyes. The tropical moist forest. This is going to be like our rainforest and jungle. Hot, lots of rain, 80 inches per year on average. There's going to be a ton of life because there's going to be a ton of water, and the temperature is going to be perfect for it. There are going to be millions of insect types, and the deforestation has caused, as we see in this bottom picture, a major problem. We're losing tons of insects. We're losing tons of insects, and in this place, there are plants and animals that have yet to be discovered. A lot of times we find our medicines in these plants. These medicines, these natural medicines, give us the ability to cure things like cancer, like AIDS, and different things like that, different things of that nature. I'm not saying that there are plants that are doing that, but we just don't know because we're cutting these trees down, we're cutting these areas down to where they're barren, like this picture on the right, without even finding out the life that's in there. We're just cutting it down and not caring. So it is a major problem. And also, if you remember from first grade, plants give us oxygen. They give us oxygen. So if we don't have plants, we don't have oxygen. So we need to be really careful about what we're doing and how we're treating our forests because there are major, these tropical moist forests are our major oxygen suppliers throughout the world. I don't know the exact number, But if you look up the exact number and bring it to me, the first person that does that, I'll give you 5 points extra credit. But they give us a certain percentage, a major percentage of oxygen that is in the air on the earth. So they're extremely important, not only for medicinal purposes, but also for just oxygen and life purposes. Tropical seasonal forests, they're a little different. They have 2 distinct seasons. So when we talk about distinct seasons, we're talking about deciduous or grasslands and the tropical seasonal forest. Now, the grasslands, they have 4 distinct seasons, but tropical seasonal have 2. We have wet or we have dry. There's no in between. There's going to be hot all year round. So it's going to be very similar temperature to the tropical moist forest. However, it's not going to rain all year round like it does in the tropical moist forest. It's going to be its plants are going to have to be drought resistant, because for about 6 months of the year it's not getting any rain at all, but about 6 months of the year they're getting a ton of rain. So they have to be able to adapt and live in a place where they're going to be either drowned or parched. So they've adapted to be able to handle that, and they have grown in such a way that it has allowed them. Most people worldwide are going to live in these type of forests. They live in Africa, Asia, and Australia are where we're going to see these types of forests. However, when we look at them, of this type of forest, in some areas we're looking at about 1% being left. People are just wiping it out and not caring about what happens. So we need to be careful, because again, these are, once they're gone, they're gone. We can't bring them back. As much as we'd like to try, as much as we'd like to do it, when we wipe these things out, we're not just wiping out the plants, we're also wiping out the animals that live there. So when we wipe out these animals, when we wipe out these organisms, we're putting ourselves in a precarious situation where there is no way to bring them back. We might be able to bring back the plants, but once the animals are gone, once the animals are extinct, the animals are gone. If we keep seeds for plants, we can always replant the plants. But we can't always reintroduce animals into the wild that are no longer wild. If we take something into the zoo and it gets fed by humans every single day, and then we try and put it in the wild, it's not going to be very successful. So we have to be careful about what we're doing. We have to be careful about how we're approaching these forests, because it is a problem. And it can cause major, major damage to our ecosystems and to our whole world, worldwide. So make sure when you consider these things, when you consider what's going on, that you're considering that these things, even though you may feel like they don't affect you, they really do affect you. And as we move through this unit, the rest of this unit, you will see the effect of what it can do when you remove certain animals from an ecosystem. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of your notes. If you have questions or you need to replay through them, please, please, please feel free to do so. Ask me, call me, I'll come over, I'll talk to you. Other than that, guys, get ready, because we're going to do a couple other assignments, and this unit is pretty much my favorite unit besides endangered animals. So we'll talk to you if you have any questions. If you don't, we'll move on to the next assignment.